All right, so previously we covered the legends and the data sorting. In this one, we're going to cover the primary and the secondary value axis. So first thing that you can see while looking at the chart is yes, we do support dual y-axis, which means that you can have a primary axis and a secondary axis. And you can assign any single series to each and every one of them. Now, as always, let's go to the training view and build a visual from scratch to actually see how to do this step by step. So let's add an instance of the combo visual, resize it so it's easier to work with, and as always, let's remove the background so that it fits a little bit more nicely into the theme. Now, for the series setups itself, in this case, for the categories, we're going to be using the department. And for the series, in this case, we're going to be using payout as series 1. And then on the second series, I'm actually going to be doing something a little bit more different. I'm going to be using name, which is a textual column, and I'm going to change it to sort, or actually to show me the count of names, so actually the count of employees. So first things first, for me to remember what I'm using here is going to be, I'm going to rename for the visual, and I'm going to say number of employees. There we go. And afterwards, what we need to do is we need to actually assign the series to the secondary y-axis. The primary reason why I want to do this is because if you look at the chart itself, you can see that the payout goes into millions, whereas the number of employees is just a couple of hundreds. So having them on the same scale doesn't really make a lot of sense. So let's go into the formatting tab. And first things first, we're going to enable the secondary series. But if you start to look at the chart now, you can see that we have the values on the secondary y-axis, but we don't actually have anything assigned to it. That's because by default, everything is assigned to the primary axis. Now, in order to assign the axis to the secondary value, we need to open up Series 2 configuration right here. We need to scroll down a bit more, and we need to find a setting called value axis. We're going to choose this one and set it on the secondary. There you go. Now we have a visual with 2 series assigned to each of the axes. Now, if we scroll up a bit more and we find where we were before on the secondary y-axis customization, you can see that we actually do have additional settings here. So first off, we have the side. Now, by default, primary axis is always going to be positioned on the left-hand side, whereas the secondary axis is always going to be on the right-hand side. That's the default behavior. Now, if you want to change this, it's completely up to you. You could just open up the drop-down for the side and choose whether it's left or right. So you can have both axes on the same side if you really want to have it. Now, afterwards, you do have some customization for the fonts. So you have things like font colors, families, sizes, and so forth. After that, we have the title text. So what you can essentially do here is provide a title for that value axis to make it more prominent or that easier to be read by the end user. In this case, since we have payout and number of employees, I'm actually going to name the secondary axis number of employees. There we go. And what I'm going to do additionally is I'm going to change the color of the font. The main reason why I'm doing this is because I want the end user to be able to notice these changes, or not even these changes, but the value axis straight away. So you can easily understand which series is assigned to what axis. So here we adjusted it for the title, but I'm also going to change this for the value axis itself. So now when the user looks at the chart, he can see that the purple column is represented on the right-hand side on the value axis. So it's just for easier readability. Now, if we go further, we can see also that we can adjust the logarithmic scale. So this is something that the drill down visuals from ZoomCharts also allow you to do. We allow you to choose whether or not this value axis is based on logarithmic or linear scaling. So if you want to enable logarithmic to be your default scaling model, you have a toggle right here. Afterwards, in some cases, you also need these functionalities, things like force top and bottom values. Afterwards, you have your axis sizes, which essentially allows you to create more distance from the right-hand side. So for example, in really specific cases, if I needed more space, I can increase this number to make it more kind of prominent, to make more space for the end user to provide more information within that title. Afterwards, you of course have your value types. So in some cases, you are going to be using numerical values. In some cases, you are going to be using percentages. So just make sure that whenever you are switching between them, you do assign the correct value axis to the right series. Now, afterwards, you of course have your display units. So in this case, for example, for numbers of employees, it's not that important because we're just going into hundreds. For the primary axis, we're going into millions. And the display unit essentially allows you to choose to showcase the values in millions, thousands, trillions, and so forth. After that, we also have our value decimals to fine-tune that value, what you're seeing there. This is typically used when you're actually starting to use these value aggregations. When you're showing a value as a non-aggregation, so the full number, you don't typically want to display also decimals because the number is going to be extensive. If you start to shorten these, for example, millions, it's typical that you showcase at least 1 or 2 decimal values. One thing that's sort of unique about our visuals is we do also allow you to add affixes. In this case, for example, we have numbers of employees, so that's not really necessary. But think about cases where you have things like pressure. So what you can do here is you can enable value affixes, and 2 new fields are going to be added. So value prefix and suffix. And for suffix, you typically have something like kilograms per square meter. So that's just one way on how you can work with the axis and customize this even further. Now, the next one is scale adjustment tolerance. What this means is you can enable it to have a little bit more breathing space at the top of the values so that it doesn't go to the very top of it. So for example, if I move this to be on 0, you can see that these values go to the top of the chart. If I put it at something like 0.1, it has enough room so it fits nice and neatly within it. And last but not least are going to be the scale minimum steps. So you can define the steps for each of the value axes. And you can also enable custom value ranges if that's something that you're looking for. And last thing that you can also do here is, this is done in really specific cases, but you can also align the value axis so that the step lines align to the primary axis. I haven't seen a lot of these cases being used, but for certain cases, this is definitely a lifesaver. So yeah, these are the main formatting options for the primary and secondary y-axis. And I hope you can create something that's really stunning. And don't forget that you do have these options of going to the combo visual view or the combo bar visual view just to see something different.